My wife and her friends invited me to dinner at a restaurant. I got there, and they mocked me, saying there was no chair for me, and I could sit outside and wait for them. I immediately called the manager, and their faces turned pale. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Sandra from Los Angeles. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I remember that afternoon, the quiet pressing against me, restless, like something waiting just out of sight. The living room felt too big, too empty, the leather couch creaking under me, sunlight slicing through the blinds in thin, golden bars. I wondered when the house had started to feel this way, vast and unyielding, like a space I couldn't fill. 5 years married to Elena, and somehow, the distance between us had grown wider than the rooms we shared. The coffee table was cluttered with my work, blueprints for the new Luminance location, spreadsheets, a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold. I own Luminance, the upscale restaurant downtown, but I kept it secret from everyone outside the staff, including Elena and her friends, even my mother, who'd always said I was too quiet for big things. I liked the quiet, the power of owning something beautiful, something people admired, without needing to shout it from the rooftops. It was mine, and that was enough. But Elena, she'd changed. I saw it in the way she moved through the house, like she was always on her way somewhere else. Her laughter, once warm and easy, had turned sharp, edged with something I couldn't name. She spent more time with Lila and Vanessa now, her socialite friends who wore their wealth like armor. Lila, her diamond earrings flashing, and Vanessa, her voice loud and sharp, slicing through conversations. They'd look at me, their eyes sliding over me like I was a piece of furniture, and I'd feel it, the weight of their dismissal. Elena never said it, but I knew she felt it too. I wasn't enough for them, and maybe, deep down, I wasn't enough for her. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping low, when she came home, the front door clicking shut behind her. I heard her heels on the hardwood, sharp and deliberate, like she wanted me to know she was there. I looked up from my papers, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her hair pulled back tight, her lips painted red. She wore a dress I didn't recognize, black and sleek, the kind of thing she'd wear to impress someone else. Not me. Daniel, she said, her voice clipped, like she was checking something off a list. We're going to Luminance tonight. Me, Lila, Vanessa. You should come. It'll be fun. I blinked, caught off guard. Luminance. My place. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I pushed it aside. She hadn't invited me anywhere in weeks, maybe months. I searched her face, looking for the Elena I'd married, the one who'd laughed at my bad jokes, who'd fallen asleep on my shoulder during late-night movies. But her eyes were distant, her smile tight, like she was playing a part. Fun, I repeated, testing the word. It felt foreign, like it didn't belong between us anymore. Yeah, sure. I'll come. Her smile flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something. Amusement, maybe, or something darker. Good, she said, and then she was gone, her heels clicking down the hall, leaving me alone with the quiet again. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying her words. It'll be fun. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe we could sit at that table, share a bottle of wine, laugh like we used to. But there was a knot in my stomach, tight and unyielding, like a warning I couldn't ignore. I pushed it down, told myself I was overthinking. Maybe this was her way of reaching out, of bridging the gap that had grown between us. Maybe tonight would change things. I remembered the first time we'd gone to Luminance, years ago, before the distance, before Lila and Vanessa. It wasn't my place then. I bought it later, quietly, after the original owner retired. But that night, Elena had loved it. She'd run her fingers over the velvet chairs, her eyes wide as she took in the chandeliers, the way the light danced on the wine glasses. This place, she'd said, it's like a dream. I'd watched her, memorizing the way she smiled, the way she looked at me like I was someone worth seeing. I wondered if she'd look at me like that tonight. I thought about the CEO's chair at Luminance, reserved for VIPs, a throne I'd never sat in until tonight. The memory faded, replaced by the present, and I felt the weight of it, the hope, the doubt, the quiet. I stood, stretching, my joints protesting like they knew what was coming. I walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a suit. Nothing flashy, just charcoal gray, the kind of thing I wore to blend in. I caught my reflection in the mirror, dark hair, tired eyes, a face that looked older than 38. I wondered what Elena saw when she looked at me now. I wondered if she saw me at all. I dressed slowly, buttoning the shirt, knotting the tie, each movement deliberate, like I was armoring myself. I thought about luminance, the way it felt to walk through those doors, knowing it was mine. The staff knew me, of course, Marcus, the manager, with his sharp suits and sharper eyes, Clara, the hostess, who always smiled like she knew a secret. They'd see me tonight, and they'd know. But Elena wouldn't. Not yet. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and headed for the door. The quiet pressed against me, restless, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I stepped outside, the evening air cool against my skin, and locked the door behind me. The street was quiet, the sky bruising purple, and I felt it again, that quiet, heavy, and waiting. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road. The city unfolded around me, all glass and steel, the lights of luminance glowing in the distance like a beacon. I drove, my hands tight on the wheel, my mind racing. I thought about Elena's smile, the way it had flickered, the way it hadn't reached her eyes. I thought about Lila and Vanessa, their laughter, their dismissal. I thought about the table waiting for me, the chairs, the wine glasses, the chandeliers. And somewhere, deep down, I wondered if there'd be a chair for me at all. I stepped into luminance like I always did, quietly, through the glass door, the chime above it soft and familiar. But tonight, the air felt different, charged, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. The chandeliers glowed above me, their light scattering across the polished wood floors, and the murmur of voices wrapped around me, warm and alive. I loved this place, my place, but tonight it felt like a stage, and I wasn't sure what role I'd been cast in. I saw them before they saw me. Elena, Lila, and Vanessa, sitting at the head of a long table near the center of the room. The table was set for royalty, white linens, crystal wine glasses, silverware glinting under the light. They were laughing, their heads thrown back, their voices sharp and bright, cutting through the hum of the restaurant. Elena wore that black dress, the one I didn't recognize, and her hair caught the light, a dark cascade down her back. Lila's diamond earrings flashed like tiny fires, and Vanessa's red lipstick smeared slightly as she sipped her wine. They looked untouchable, like they belonged here more than I ever could. I took a step forward, my shoes silent on the floor, and that's when I noticed it. The table was full. Every chair was taken out. Elena at the head, Lila and Vanessa on either side, and a couple of their other friends filling the rest. No empty seat. No place for me. My stomach dropped, the knot from earlier tightening, twisting, like a fist closing around my ribs. I stood there, frozen, my suit suddenly feeling too tight, my tie choking me. Elena looked up, her eyes locking on mine, and I saw it. The smirk. It was small, barely there, but it was enough. "Oh, Daniel," she said, her voice loud enough to carry, loud enough to draw attention. "You made it." She leaned back in her chair, her wine glass dangling from her fingers, and the smirk grew, sharp and deliberate. "I guess we forgot to save you a seat." "Oops." Lila laughed first, a high, grating sound that scraped against my nerves. Vanessa joined in, her voice lower, more mocking. "Yeah, Daniel," she said, her eyes glinting with something cruel. "You can sit outside and wait for us, like the help." The others at the table snickered, their faces blurring into a haze of amusement, and I felt it. The weight of their laughter, the heat of their eyes, the sting of it all. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my hands clenched at my sides. The room seemed to tilt, the chandeliers spinning above me, the voices echoing in my ears. I looked at Elena, searching for something, anything, a flicker of regret, a crack in her mask. But there was nothing, just that smirk, that cold, calculated amusement, like she'd planned this, like she'd wanted this. And maybe she had. Maybe this was her way of telling me what she'd never said out loud, that I wasn't enough, that I'd never be enough. The quiet stretched, oppressive, like the room was holding its breath, and I felt it. The eyes of the other diners, the the staff, the weight of their attention. Clara, the hostess, hovered nearby, her face pale, her hands twisting together. Marcus stood by the bar, his sharp eyes locked on me, his jaw tight. They knew. They knew who I was, what this place meant to me. And now they were watching, waiting, like the whole room was holding its breath. I took a step back, my shoes scuffing against the floor, and I felt the anger rise, hot and sharp, like a blade in my chest. I could have walked away. I could have left, let them have their moment, let them laugh. But something snapped, something deep and raw, and I knew I couldn't. Not here. Not in my place. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady despite the tremor in my chest, and I dialed Marcus. He answered on the first ring, his voice low and urgent. "Daniel, what the hell's going on? You want me to bring me the chair?" I said, my voice calm, too calm, like it belonged to someone else. "The CEO's chair." Now, there was a pause, a beat of silence, and then Marcus said, "On it." I hung up, slipping the phone back into my pocket, and I waited. The room seemed to shrink, the voices fading, the lights dimming, until it was just me and that table, just me and Elena, just me and the emptiness where my chair should have been. Marcus appeared, moving fast, his suit crisp, his face unreadable. He carried the chair, the CEO's chair, high-backed, leather, a throne in its own right. It was reserved for special occasions, for VIPs, for moments that mattered. Tonight, it would matter. He set it down at the head of the table, right where Elena sat, and the room fell silent, the laughter dying like a flame snuffed out. I walked forward, my steps deliberate, my eyes locked on Elena. She stared at me, her smirk faltering, her wine glass trembling in her hand, her eyes darting, like she was recalculating, like she'd misjudged me. I stopped in front of her, close enough to see the flicker of confusion in her eyes, the crack in her armor. "Move," I said, my voice low, steady, like a command she couldn't ignore. She hesitated, her lips parting, but then she stood, stepping aside, her chair scraping against the floor. I sat down, the leather cool against my back, the weight of the room shifting, tilting, like the ground had moved beneath us. I looked at them, Elena, Lila, Vanessa, the others, and I saw it. The shock, the disbelief, the fear. "I own this place," I said, my voice carrying, filling the silence. "Every chair, every glass, every inch. And you." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on Elena. "You don't belong here anymore." Whispers rippled through the room, but I ignored them. I raised a hand, and Marcus was there, security at his side, their faces hard, their movements swift. "Escort them out," I said, my voice cold, final. "And make sure they never come back." Elena's face crumpled, her eyes wide, her voice breaking. "Daniel, wait. I didn't mean, but I didn't wait. I didn't listen." I watched as security moved, their hands firm, their faces blank, as they led her out, Lila and Vanessa protesting, their voices shrill, their dignity unraveling. The door closed behind them, the chime ringing, and the quiet settled again, heavy and final. I sat there, the chair beneath me a throne, a prison, a weight I couldn't name. The room watched, the staff watched, but I didn't care. I felt it, the satisfaction, sharp and fleeting, and the void, unfillable, like a shadow I couldn't escape. I wondered if this was victory. I wondered if this was enough. And somewhere, deep down, I wondered what came next. I drove home that night with the windows down, the city air rushing past me, cold and sharp, like it could scrape away the weight of what I'd done. The streetlights blurred, streaks of gold against the black, and the engine hummed beneath me, steady, unyielding. But inside, I was anything but steady. The quiet of the car felt louder than the restaurant, louder than Elena's protests, louder than the chime of that damn door as it closed behind her. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, and I wondered if I'd won or lost. I wondered if it even mattered. The house greeted me like an old friend who'd grown tired of waiting. The porch light flickered, weak and yellow, and the front door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the emptiness. I stepped inside, the hardwood cool under my shoes, and I stopped, just stood there, staring at the living room. The coffee table was still cluttered with my work, blueprints, spreadsheets, that cold mug of coffee, but it felt different now, like a relic from another life. I dropped my keys on the counter, the clatter sharp, and I sank onto the couch, the leather creaking under me, familiar, grounding. I replayed the night, frame by frame, like a movie I couldn't pause. Elena's smirk, sharp and deliberate, like a blade she'd honed just for me. Lila's laugh, high and grating. Vanessa's mocking tone, their words slicing through me like glass. And then me, standing there, frozen, until I wasn't. The chair, the reveal, the silence, the shock. The way Elena's face had crumpled, her voice breaking, her apologies too late. I'd felt it then, the satisfaction, hot and fleeting, like a match flaring in the dark. But now, sitting here, it was gone, replaced by something heavier, something I couldn't name. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and I stared at the floor, the wood grain blurring. I thought about Elena, about the 5 years we'd shared, the laughter, the fights, the silences. I remembered the first time she dismissed me, months ago, maybe longer, her voice casual, her words cutting. "You're so quiet, Daniel. So boring. Don't you ever want more?" I'd brushed it off, told myself it was stress, told myself she didn't mean it. But it kept happening, her comments piling up like stones, each one heavier than the last. The dinner wasn't the first crack. It was the final blow, the one that shattered everything. I stood, restless, and walked to the bedroom, the hallway stretching out like a tunnel. Her things were still there. Her dresses in the closet, her perfume on the dresser, her jewelry box glinting in the moonlight. I opened the closet, ran my fingers over the silk of her black dress, the one she'd worn tonight, and I felt it again, the anger, sharp and raw, like a fire I couldn't put out. I didn't want her here, not anymore. I didn't want the reminders, the ghosts, the weight of her betrayal. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady, and I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice low, cautious. "Daniel, you okay?" "I need her things gone," I said, my voice flat, final. "Pack them up. Send them to her mother's. Do this before I return from my trip in few days." There was a pause, a beat of silence, and then Marcus said, "You sure?" "I'm sure." I cut him off, sharper than I meant to. "And call my lawyer. Tell him to start the papers. I want her out of my life." Marcus didn't argue. He knew me, knew when I'd made up my mind. "All right," he said, and I hung up, the quiet settling again, heavy and final. I stood there, staring at the closet, and I felt it, the void, unfillable, like a shadow I couldn't escape. I wondered if this was freedom. I wondered if this was enough. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, the TV flickering, the sound muted, and I thought about Elena, about where she'd gone, about what she'd felt when security let her out. I didn't want to care, didn't want to wonder, but I did. I pictured her at her mother's, the cluttered living room, the faded couch, her mother's disapproval heavy. I'd met her mother once, a sharp-eyed woman with a sharper tongue, and I knew she'd be relentless. "You did this, Elena," I imagined her saying, her voice cutting, her eyes hard. "You threw it all away." I wondered if Lila and Vanessa had stayed, if they'd rallied around her, or if they'd abandoned her, blaming her for the mess. I pictured her alone, her phone silent, her social circle crumbling, her pride shattered. I pictured her trying to use her card, the beep of denial, the flush of embarrassment. I consulted my lawyer, ensured it was legal, closed the joint accounts, locked her out. I pictured her struggles, and I wondered if I cared. I wondered if I should. Days later, Marcus called, his voice clipped, professional. "It's done," he said. "Her things are gone. The lawyer's working on the papers. They'll be ready soon." I thanked him and hung up. Marcus handed me the letter days later, her handwriting shaky, the envelope sealed tight. I stood there, staring at the space, and I felt it, the quiet, louder than ever, like a void I couldn't escape. I sat on the couch, the silence pressing against me, and I wondered what came next. I wondered if I'd heal, if I'd move on, if I'd find peace. I wondered if Elena would too. I wondered if I wanted her to. And somewhere, deep down, I wondered if this was the end, or just the beginning of something worse. I woke to the sound of rain, soft and steady, like a drumbeat against the windows. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you, oppressive, like a weight I couldn't shake. I rolled over, the sheets cool against my skin, and I stared at the ceiling, the white paint cracked in places, like the fissures in my life. It had been weeks since that night at Luminance, weeks since I'd sent Elena's things away, weeks since I'd cut her out. But the quiet lingered, a ghost I couldn't shake, a reminder of everything I'd lost and everything I'd chosen to lose. I got up, my feet cold against the hardwood, and I walked to the kitchen, the routine automatic, mechanical. Coffee, black, no sugar, the mug warm in my hands. I stood at the counter, staring out the window, the rain streaking the glass, blurring the world beyond. I thought about Luminance, about the work waiting for me, about the life I needed to rebuild. I'd thrown myself into it, the expansion, the second location, the plans piling up like bricks, each one a step towards something new. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I drove to Luminance that morning, the rain drumming against the windshield, the wipers slashing back and forth, like they could cut through the fog in my mind. The city was gray, all steel and concrete, the lights muted, the streets slick. I parked in the alley, the familiar crunch of gravel under the tires, and I stepped out, the rain cold against my face. The restaurant was quiet, the staff prepping for lunch, the clatter of dishes and voices a low hum. I walked through the back door, the smell of garlic and thyme hitting me, warm and grounding. Marcus was there, his suit crisp, his eyes sharp, like he could see right through me. "You look like hell," he said, his voice low, but there was a flicker of concern, a crack in his usual stoicism. I shrugged, hung my coat on the rack, and walked to the office, the door creaking as I pushed it open. The desk was cluttered, papers and plans, a laptop glowing in the dim light. I sat down, the chair creaking under me, and I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring, the words meaningless. I needed help. I knew it, had known it for weeks, but admitting it felt like surrender, like failure. I pulled out my phone, my fingers hesitating, and I searched for therapists, the screen bright against the dimness. I found one, Dr. Ellis, her profile calm, professional, her photo warm, like she understood. I called, my voice steady, and I booked an appointment, the words mechanical, like I was ordering takeout. I hung up, the quiet settling again, and I wondered if this was the first step. I wondered if it would be enough. That afternoon, I met Sarah. She was the new chef, hired for the expansion, her apron stained, her eyes bright, her presence steady. She moved through the kitchen like she owned it, her hands quick, her voice firm, directing the staff with a quiet authority. I watched her from the doorway, the steam rising, the clatter of pans, the rhythm of it all. She looked up, caught my eye, and smiled, a small, genuine thing, like she saw me, really saw me. "You're Daniel, right?" she said, her voice warm, like sunlight through the rain. "The boss." I nodded, my throat tight, and I stepped forward, the heat of the kitchen wrapping around me. "Yeah," I said, my voice rough, like I hadn't used it in days. "Just checking in." We talked, small things, the menu, the plans, the weather, but it felt different, lighter, like a weight lifting. She laughed, a sound like bells, and I felt it, the spark, small and tentative, but there. I wondered if this was what healing felt like. I wondered if I was ready. I thought about Elena, too, more than I wanted to. I pictured her at that cafe, the one her mother had mentioned, her apron stained, her hands busy, her face tired. I pictured her mentor, the older woman with sharp eyes, guiding her, pushing her, helping her grow. I wondered if she regretted it, if she saw now what she'd lost. I wondered if she'd changed, if she'd grown, if she'd faced herself. I pictured her in therapy, like me, sitting in a quiet room, her voice breaking, her words raw. I read the letter again, the rain falling, the words heavy, her handwriting shaky, her words careful, like she was afraid to say too much. "I'm sorry," it said, simple, direct, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I folded the letter, slipped it into a drawer, and I stood, restless, pacing the room. I thought about Sarah, about her smile, about the way she looked at me, like I was someone worth seeing. I thought about Dr. Ellis, about the appointment, about the work ahead. I thought about Luminance, about the second location, about the life I needed to build. I thought about Elena, about her letter, about her struggles, about the quiet between us. I sat down, the couch creaking under me, and I stared at the window, the rain streaking the glass, blurring the world beyond. I felt it, the hope, small and tentative, like a seed in the dark. I felt it, the doubt, heavy and unyielding, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I felt it, the quiet, louder than ever, like a void I couldn't escape. And somewhere, deep down, I wondered if this was healing. I wondered if this was enough. I wondered what came next. I stood in the office at Luminance, the desk cluttered with papers, the laptop glowing in the dim light, the air thick with the smell of coffee and time. It was late, the restaurant quiet, the hum of the kitchen faded to a whisper. I leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking under me, and I stared at the ceiling, the shadows shifting, like ghosts I couldn't name. Months had passed since that night. Months since I'd sent Elena away. Months since I'd cut her out. But the quiet lingered, heavy and unyielding, a weight I carried, a shadow I couldn't shake. Marcus knocked on the door, sharp and urgent, and I looked up, my heart sinking, like I knew what was coming. He stepped inside, his suit crisp, his eyes sharp. Clara recognized her at the bar, under a false name. She's been watching, waiting, he said, his voice low, careful, like he was testing the water. Daniel, she's here. Elena, what do you want to do? I froze, my breath catching, my hands clenching the armrests. Elena, here, in my place. The words hit me like a punch, sharp and sudden, and I felt it. The anger, hot and raw, like a fire I thought I'd put out. I pictured her at the bar, her hair pulled back, her eyes darting, her hands trembling. I pictured her waiting, hoping, planning, like she'd come to fix something, like she'd come to break something. I stood, the chair scraping against the floor, and I looked at Marcus, my voice steady, too steady, like it belonged to someone else. I'll handle it. He nodded, his face unreadable, and he stepped aside, letting me pass. I walked through the kitchen, the steam rising, the clatter of pans faint, the staff glancing at me, their eyes curious, their voices hushed. I pushed through the swinging doors, the dining room opening up before me, the chandeliers glowing, the tables empty, the silence heavy. And there she was, at the bar, her back to me, her shoulders tense, her hands wrapped around a glass of water, the ice clinking softly. She wore a plain dress, gray and worn, her hair shorter, her face pale, like the weight of her struggles had etched itself there. I stopped, just stood there, watching her, the distance between us vast, unbridgeable. She looked different, smaller, her posture fragile, like she'd been hollowed out. I wondered if it was the cafe, the work, the struggles. I wondered if it was the letter, the therapy, the weight of her choices. I wondered if it was me. I took a step forward, my shoes silent on the floor, and she turned, her eyes locking on mine, wide and startled, like she hadn't expected me, like she hadn't planned this far. Daniel, she said, her voice breaking, her hands trembling, the glass slipping slightly. I didn't think you'd come. I just needed to see you. To talk. Please. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my hands clenched at my sides. I looked at her, searching for something, anything, the smirk, the amusement, the betrayal. But there was nothing, just her, raw and vulnerable, her eyes red, her face pale, her words desperate. I took another step, closer, close enough to see the lines around her eyes, the shadows under them, the weight of her struggles. Talk, I said, my voice cold, final, like a door closing. Say what you came to say. She swallowed, her throat bobbing, and she stood, her movements shaky, like she was afraid to fall. I'm sorry, she said, her voice small, breaking, like it hurt to say. I know it's not enough. I know it's too late, but I'm sorry. For that night, for everything. For the way I treated you, for the way I let them, Lila, Vanessa, change me. I was wrong, Daniel. I was stupid, and I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. I listened, my face blank, my heart pounding, the words echoing like stones thrown into a well. I remembered that night, her smirk, her laughter, their mockery. I remembered the chair, the reveal, the silence. I remembered the fallout, her things gone, her letter, her struggles. I remembered it all, and I felt it. The anger, sharp and fleeting, and the void, unfillable, like a shadow I learned to carry. You're right, I said, my voice low, steady, like a blade. It's not enough. She flinched, her eyes filling, her hands clenching, like she was holding herself together. I know, she said, her voice breaking, her words raw. I've been in therapy, Daniel. I've been working at the cafe, trying to face myself, trying to change. I wrote that letter. I know you read it, but I needed to say it, to your face. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I needed you to know. I needed to try. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw it. The growth, small and tentative, like a seed in the dark. I saw the regret, the pain, the weight of her choices. I saw the woman I'd married, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd lost. And I saw the woman she'd become, the one who'd hurt me, the one who'd tried to heal, the one who stood here, asking for closure, asking for nothing. I felt it. The hope, faint and fleeting, and the doubt, heavy and unyielding, like a shadow I couldn't shake. You made your choice that night, I said, my voice steady, final, like a verdict. You chose them. You chose that smirk, that laughter, that betrayal. And I made mine. I chose to protect myself, to cut you out, to move on. You don't get to come back now, Elena. You don't get to undo it. She nodded, her eyes closing, her tears falling, silent and steady, like rain. I know, she said, her voice small, breaking, like a whisper in the dark. I just needed you to know. I needed to say it. Goodbye, Daniel. She turned, her movements slow, deliberate, like she was carrying a weight she couldn't drop. She walked to the door, the chime ringing, soft and final, and I watched her go, the silence settling again, heavy and unyielding. I stood there, the bar empty, the room quiet, the silence settling. I felt it, the closure, sharp and fleeting, and the void, unfillable, like a shadow I'd learned to carry. I walked back to the office, the door creaking as I pushed it open, and I sat down, the chair creaking under me. I thought about Sarah, about her smile, about the quiet moments we'd shared. I thought about Dr. Ellis, about the work, about the healing. I thought about Elena, about her words, about her struggles, about the silence between us. And somewhere, deep down, I wondered if this was enough. I wondered what came next. I stood in the new luminance, the second location, the air thick with the smell of fresh paint and time, the chandeliers glowing above me, their light scattering across the polished wood floors. It was opening night, the room buzzing, the staff moving like a well-oiled machine, their voices sharp and bright, cutting through the hum of anticipation. I wore a charcoal suit, the tie loose, my hands steady, but inside, I felt it, the weight of this moment, the weight of everything that had brought me here. I looked around, the table set, the wine glasses glinting, the chairs filled, and I felt it, the pride, sharp and fleeting, and the void, unfillable, like a shadow I learned to carry. I walked to the head of the room, the CEO's chair waiting, high-backed, leather, a throne in its own right. I sat down, the leather cool against my back, and I looked out at the crowd, their faces blurring, their laughter echoing, like a dream I'd built from the ashes. I remembered that night, months ago, the night Elena had smirked, the night I'd revealed myself, the night I'd chosen to walk away. The chair had been a weapon then, a symbol of power, of revenge. But now, sitting here, it felt different, softer, like a reminder of resilience, of growth, of the life I'd reclaimed. I thought about the journey, the weeks, the months, the silence. I remembered the first session with Dr. Ellis, the quiet room, the weight of my words, the way she'd listened, her eyes calm, her voice steady, like a lighthouse in the dark. I remembered the work, the questions, the memories, the pain. I remembered Sarah, her smile, her laughter, her presence, like sunlight through the rain. We'd shared quiet moments, cooking in the kitchen, walking through the city, talking about nothing and everything. I remembered the spark, small and tentative, and the hope, steady and growing like a seed in the light. I looked at Sarah now, standing by the bar, her apron gone, her dress simple, her hair loose, her eyes bright. She caught my gaze, smiled, a small, genuine thing, like she saw me, really saw me. I felt it, the warmth, the connection, the possibility. We'd planned our next adventure, a trip to the coast, just us, the ocean, the quiet. I wondered if this was what healing felt like. I wondered if this was enough. I thought about Elena, too, more than I wanted to. I remembered the confrontation, her words, her tears, her goodbye. I remembered the letter, the smudged ink, the weight of her regret. I remembered the silence, the distance, the choices. I pictured her that night, hours after the opening, alone at the cafe, the lights dim, the tables empty. I pictured her pouring coffee, the steam rising, the cup warm in her hands. I pictured her mentor, the older woman with sharp eyes, guiding her, pushing her, helping her grow. I pictured her community, Small but genuine, their voices warm, their laughter real. I pictured her reading the article, my face on the screen, the headline bold, the words sharp. I pictured her smiling, faint and bittersweet, acknowledging it, accepting it, turning back to her work, ready to face her own path. I stood, restless, and walked to the window, the city stretching out before me, all glass and steel, the lights glowing, the streets alive. I thought about that night, the night of the dinner, the night of the empty chair. I remembered the humiliation, the anger, the reveal. I remembered the fallout, her things gone, her letter, her struggles. I remembered it all, and I felt it. The distance, vast and unbridgeable, and the closure, sharp and final, like a door I'd chosen to close. I returned to the chair, sat down, and I looked out at the room, the buzz, the life, the dream. I felt it, the pride, steady and growing, like a fire I'd learned to tend. I felt it, the hope, bright and unyielding, like a star in the dark. I felt it. The silence, softer now, like a friend I'd learned to sit with. I wondered if this was healing. I wondered if this was enough. And somewhere, deep down, I knew it was. I stood, the chair creaking under me, and I walked to Sarah, her smile bright, her hand warm in mine. We stepped outside, the night cool, the city alive, the stars faint but there. We talked, small things, the trip, the ocean, the quiet. I felt it, the connection, the possibility, the future. I felt it, the closure, sharp and final, and the hope, bright and unyielding, like a star in the dark. I looked back at luminance, the glow, the buzz, the life. I looked at the chair, empty now, waiting, like a reminder, like a promise. I felt it, the pride, the hope, the quiet, gentler now, like a companion I'd come to know. And somewhere, deep down, I knew it was enough. I knew it was time. I knew it was mine. Thank you for joining me on this story. If Daniel and Elena's story of betrayal, resilience, and redemption resonated with you, hit that subscribe button to catch more stories like this, tales of quiet strength and second chances. Drop a like if you felt the weight of that empty chair, and let me know in the comments, what would you have done in Daniel's place? Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that healing is possible, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Until next time, remember, sometimes, the emptiest chairs hold the heaviest stories. See you soon in the next story.